What would you do if a quiet 12-year-old boy reading his book in first class was suddenly treated like a criminal at 30,000 feet? What if 3 armed officers stormed down the aisle because one entitled passenger decided he didn't belong there? This wasn't turbulence. This was prejudice, raw and undeniable. A child who had done nothing wrong found himself at the center of a storm fueled by ignorance and arrogance. His calm eyes, his steady hands, and his quiet dignity stood in brutal contrast to the chaos swirling around him. But here's the twist in just a few minutes. The entire plane, and soon the entire world, would discover that this boy was no ordinary passenger. He was someone whose brilliance, achievements, and character would shatter every stereotype, leaving the woman who accused him with nothing but regret. How does a child carry himself with more strength than the adults around him? How does grace rise out of hate? And how does truth silence prejudice? Stay with me, because this is a story you will never forget. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss powerful stories like this one. Now, let's begin. The command cracked through the pressurized air of the cabin like thunder splitting the sky. Stop right there. Every conversation in Sky Continental Airlines. Flight 782 died instantly. Business class, normally a sanctuary of soft clinks of glasses, hushed laptop keyboards, and the muted lull of jet engines became a frozen stage. Heads whipped around, breath caught. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of 30 people slamming into silence. 3 figures in Navy uniforms moved down the aisle with precision. Their holstered weapons glinted beneath the dim cabin lights. Their polished shoes thudded against the carpet in perfect rhythm, each step amplifying the sense that this was no longer a commercial flight, but a courtroom in the sky. Passengers leaned back in their leather seats, their eyes wide with the primal recognition of authority. Some fumbled for their phones, hands trembling as they pressed record, knowing instinctively that this was about to become one of those viral moments people argue over for years. Others turned rigid, their bodies frozen by the ancient instinct to stay still when danger prowled close. At the center of it all sat a boy, Malik Carter, 12 years old. His legs barely reached the plush carpet from the deep cushion of seat 2A, but his presence filled the row in a way that had nothing to do with size. A hardback book rested open in his lap, pages spread like wings mid-flight. He looked up, startled but not panicked, as the armed men closed in around him, hands visible. One officer barked, though his tone carried more uncertainty than force. Malik blinked once, slowly, as if replaying the moment to check if it was real. His small hands, steady as stone, gently placed a bookmark between the pages. He closed the book carefully, as though this interruption were nothing more than a pause in a symphony, and slid it into the leather satchel at his side. The contrast was jarring. On one side, 3 trained security officers braced for a confrontation. On the other, a 12-year-old boy displaying the kind of composure many adults never manage in a lifetime. Gasps rippled through the cabin. No one spoke. But the silence had a voice. This doesn't look right. Victoria Hale, the woman in seat 2B, had frozen too. Moments ago, her shrill protests had pierced the air. Now her eyes gleamed with a strange satisfaction. The kind you see on someone convinced justice was finally bending to their will. She jabbed a manicured finger toward Malik, her diamond bracelet catching the light like a spark of accusation. "That's him," she spat, voice carrying a tremor of triumph. "That's the boy I told you about. He doesn't belong here." Her words sliced through the silence, heavy with implication. Someone like him. A low murmur stirred among the rows behind her. Passengers exchanged glances, their faces a mix of disbelief, discomfort, and curiosity. A businessman in 3C lowered his newspaper slowly. A young couple in 1D and 1E clasped each other's hands tighter. A college student in 4A raised her phone higher, framing both Malik and the officers in her shaky video. Marshal Robert Ellis, the lead officer, towered above Malik's seat. His square jaw and 15 years of service had taught him to read threats in a heartbeat. But what he saw in front of him wasn't a threat. It was a child in pressed khakis, a crisp button-down shirt, and polished brown shoes that gleamed under the cabin lights. A boy with noise-canceling headphones resting around his neck. Not a hint of fear in his posture. Still, protocol demanded action. Ellis's hand hovered near his holster, his voice firm but not unkind. "Son, I need you to stay calm. Do you understand?" Malik tilted his head. The corners of his mouth almost quirked upward. Not in defiance, something gentler, something almost tragic. "Yes, sir," he said softly, his voice clear, his diction precise. The simplicity of his reply landed like a stone dropped into a pond. Every ripple carried the same question into the minds of the witnesses. "What are we doing here?" "Flight attendant." Sophia Bennett hovered at the galley curtain, her knuckles white around her service tablet. She had been trained for turbulence, medical emergencies, even unruly passengers, but not for this. Not for the sight of a child boxed in by armed men at 35,000 feet. Her lips parted, but no words came. She stole a glance at the captain's door, as if hoping for guidance from behind that locked panel. Captain Daniel Ruiz's voice had not yet entered the cabin, but his presence pressed invisibly on every crew member. The captain decides. Tone, consequence, narrative. For now, silence. Ellis crouched slightly, lowering himself to Malik's level. The move softened the tableau. Still tense, but less like predator and prey. More like a man trying to solve a puzzle. "What's your name?" "Son Malik," the boy answered. He didn't say it timidly, nor did he force bravado. Just steady, like a stone set in place. "And your last name?" "Carter." The syllables hung in the air. Some passengers repeated them silently, testing the sound, the way people do when they suspect the name belongs to someone they should already know. Victoria snorted loudly. "You'll see. He's lying. He's trouble. I told you." Her voice trembled now, more frantic than assured. Yet the officers didn't move to restrain Malik. They just kept circling, caught between the procedure that brought them here and the growing awareness that something was wrong. Malik's eyes shifted briefly to the window. Beyond the glass stretched a sea of clouds glowing under the late afternoon sun. The world out there looked endless, calm, indifferent to the chaos inside the metal tube slicing through its sky. He drew a slow breath, remembering the words his mother had whispered that morning at the gate. "No matter what happens, hold your composure. Dignity is armor." For a moment, his chest tightened. A voice inside whispered, "Why me?" "Why again?" He pushed it down, straightened his shoulders, and looked back at Ellis. "I'd like to know why I'm being surrounded," Malik said. His tone was neither defiant nor submissive. Just a child asking a question he already knew the answer to. And everyone in that cabin knew it too. Phones kept recording. Hearts kept pounding. The flight attendant's hand trembled on the tablet. Victoria Hale's accusations grew louder. And Malik Carter, 12 years old, sat at the center of it all, unmoving, unbroken, waiting for the truth to claw its way into the light. The next 7 minutes would decide whose story the world believed. 2 minutes before, the cabin froze under the thunder of authority. Business class looked like any other late afternoon flight from Los Angeles to Washington. The hum of engines blended with the quiet chatter of passengers. Laptops glowed faintly as executives polished presentations. A silver cart rattled softly as flight attendant Sophia Bennett poured glasses of sparkling water with a practiced smile. It was the kind of calm that makes people forget they are hurtling through the sky in a metal tube. Victoria Hale shattered that calm. She shifted in seat 2B with restless irritation, her bracelets clinking like warning bells. Her voice started low, a mutter at first, but soon climbed sharp enough for half the cabin to hear. She pointed toward the boy in 2A, her manicured finger trembling as if she were identifying contraband rather than a child reading quietly beside her. "This is unacceptable," she hissed. "I paid for business class. I will not sit next to someone like him." The phrase lingered, toxic in its vagueness. Someone like him. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew exactly what she meant without her needing to spell it out. The disgust in her eyes said it all. Malik Carter turned a page in his book without looking up. He had heard variations of that tone before, though rarely this naked. At 12, he knew how quickly strangers could decide he did not belong. His fingers gripped the paper a little tighter than usual, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Sophia approached with her clipboard, her professional smile never faltering, though her knuckles whitened against the polished wood. "Ma'am, please lower your voice," she said gently. "There are other passengers trying to rest. If you have a concern, I can help you address it discreetly." Victoria snapped her head around. "Discreetly? No. This is a safety issue. That boy should not be in this seat. I want security called right now." The words cut through the cabin like a blade. A businessman in 3C lowered his newspaper an inch. A young mother across the aisle tucked her child closer. Phones quietly slid out of pockets, their lenses catching the tension that was thickening by the second. Sophia tried again, her voice calm, soothing, the way she had practiced in training modules. "Ma'am, the passenger has a valid boarding pass. If you're uncomfortable, I can see if there is another seat available for you." "No," Victoria barked. "Why should I move? He's the problem. Look at him, sitting there with all those gadgets. There is no way a child like that belongs in business class. You know what I mean." The venom in her tone left no room for misinterpretation. Malik finally raised his eyes from his book. For a moment, he considered speaking, considered defending himself, considered telling her about the ticket he had purchased, the meetings waiting for him in Washington, the performance that demanded his presence. But then he remembered his mother's voice again. Dignity is armor. He placed the bookmark carefully on the tray table, his silence a shield stronger than any retort. Inside, though, a storm gathered. Shame pricked at him like needles. Anger swelled in his chest. He imagined standing up and shouting, imagined throwing her words back at her with the sharpness they deserved. But another voice whispered back, "Don't give them what they expect. Don't let them define you." He breathed in deeply, let the air settle him, and chose silence. Victoria misread that silence as guilt. Her voice rose louder. "See, he can't even speak up. Suspicious. Look at that expensive tablet. That watch. Stolen. Probably. I am not sitting here another minute with him beside me. Call the marshal. Call them now." The businessman in 3C shifted uncomfortably. The young couple in row 1 exchanged a glance of disbelief. A college student in 4A tapped her phone screen to ensure her camera was recording. The cabin had become an audience to a performance no one wanted to watch. Sophia's composure cracked just slightly. "Ma'am, please," she pleaded. "You're creating a disturbance. This is not the way." "Do your job." Victoria cut her off, her cheeks flushing crimson. "Get security. If you don't, I will file a complaint so fast this airline won't know what hit it." Her shrill fury carried the unmistakable entitlement of someone who had never been told no, the kind of rage that demanded the world rearrange itself around her prejudices. Sophia hesitated. Protocol demanded de-escalation. But Victoria's voice was drawing stares from every row. The disturbance itself was becoming a safety issue. With a sinking feeling, she tapped her service tablet and quietly sent a message forward to the cockpit. "Passenger disturbance in 2B. Request assistance." Malik watched all of this with an almost eerie calm. His stomach knotted, but he sat upright, adjusting his shirt cuffs the way his father used to before big meetings. It was a small ritual, a way of saying to himself, "I belong. I will not shrink." Inside, though, the questions clawed. Why does she see me as danger? Why do my clothes, my books, my silence not matter? Why is my skin the only evidence she needs? He thought of his classmates who never had to justify their presence in certain spaces. He thought of the countless subtle glances he had endured in airports, in hotel lobbies, in restaurants. But this was different. This was public, violent in its intent. 2 rows back, a woman whispered to her husband, "He's just a child." The words floated forward, soft but clear enough to be heard. For the first time, Malik allowed himself to meet Victoria's eyes. Her glare was filled with a venom that belied reason. She recoiled slightly, as if even his gaze was a contamination. Sophia's message reached the cockpit. A chime echoed softly in the galley. The captain read the note, and within moments a call was made. The air marshals would intervene. Victoria leaned back, a thin smile playing across her lips. She believed she had won. 2 minutes later, the aisle thundered with footsteps. The cabin became a stage, and Malik Carter, 12 years old, found himself surrounded by men in uniform because one woman could not stand the sight of him in seat 2A. Malik Carter sat in seat 2A, perfectly still, as though stillness itself could shield him from the accusations swirling around him. At 12 years old, he did not yet have the height or the bulk that command immediate respect. But what he carried was something rarer, a quiet gravity that drew eyes even when he tried to disappear into the pages of a book. The book itself told a story. It wasn't a comic book or a travel magazine hastily snatched from an airport shop. It was a thick volume on advanced mathematics, filled with equations that most adults in the cabin would have struggled to pronounce. Malik loved the way numbers calmed him. They were constant, fair, unbothered by prejudice. 2 + 2 was 4, no matter the color of his skin. That kind of certainty was a refuge when the world felt arbitrary and hostile. His appearance added to the dissonance of the scene. Malik's shirt was a crisp white button-down, the kind pressed with care that morning by hands that loved him. His khakis were neatly creased, his shoes polished until they reflected the cabin lights. Around his wrist gleamed a modest but elegant watch, the kind chosen not for flash, but for precision. The satchel beside him, worn but sturdy, carried his essentials books, a tablet loaded with notes, and a small folder of documents. Passengers noticed these details now, in the wake of Victoria Hale's accusations. The businessman in 3C found himself staring, comparing the boy's posture to his own son's, who slouched at every dinner table. The young mother across the aisle whispered to her daughter, See how neat he looks, that's respect. Even the college student holding her phone aloft caught herself lowering it slightly, her outrage mixing with awe. Malik's headphones rested loosely around his neck. Not the plastic kind from mall shelves, but professional-grade monitors used by sound engineers. To Victoria Hale, these were evidence of theft, of fraud, of something suspicious. To Malik, they were tools of creation. He had been composing a piece before boarding, a blend of piano and strings that he hoped to finish by the end of the flight. Music, like numbers, obeyed laws bigger than bias. But now, instead of melodies, he heard the scrape of fear in his chest. He asked himself questions he had asked too many times before. Why does existing in certain spaces make me a suspect? Why must I carry proof of worth wherever I go? Why is dignity never enough to silence doubt his inner voice, shaped by years of his mother's counsel, answered back? Because the world is not always fair. Because prejudice blinds reason. Because dignity is not about convincing them, it is about protecting yourself. Malik's heart thudded harder than his calm face betrayed. He remembered his father's words, spoken one evening when they sat together on the porch. You cannot stop people from underestimating you, but you can stop them from breaking you. That line replayed like a mantra now. Across the aisle, passengers watched the stillness of his body, the steadiness of his eyes. Some felt shame burn their cheeks. They had heard Victoria's first complaints and chosen silence. They told themselves it wasn't their business. Now they saw a child bearing the weight of their silence, and guilt pressed heavy on them. Malik glanced once at Victoria Hale, who sat rigid, her jaw tight, her eyes narrowed in a mix of fear and defiance. He did not glare back. He simply looked, as though studying a complicated equation that had no solution. In that brief gaze, she felt something unfamiliar discomfort, not from his presence, but from the reflection of her own hatred. He shifted his gaze to the window. The sky stretched endless and unbroken. Clouds drifted like continents of cotton, bathed in late sunlight. Out there was no division of seats, no hierarchy of worth, no question of who belonged. For a moment, he imagined stepping out into that boundless blue, weightless and free. Sophia Bennett, watching from the galley, noticed how carefully he moved, every action deliberate, precise, closing the book, placing it in the satchel, resting his hands neatly in his lap. She recognized the performance, because that was what it was. He was performing safety, performing calm, performing the image of harmlessness to protect himself. It broke her heart, because she knew he should not have to. Malik's thoughts drifted back to the morning. His mother, Alicia Carter, had bent down to his eye level at the departure gate. She was radiant, even in simple clothes, her voice both gentle and firm. You will face people who see only what they want to see. Don't waste your breath trying to change them. Show them with your composure that you cannot be diminished. He had nodded then, unsure if he could live up to her wisdom. Now, at 35,000 feet, he realized he had no choice. Passengers continued to study him. Some began to whisper names, testing possibilities. One man muttered, "Carter. Is he related to Alicia Carter?" The musician. Another pulled out his phone, quickly searching. Faces lit up with recognition as images filled their screens. Malik beside his mother at charity events. Malik featured in articles about prodigies. Malik playing piano on televised stages. The whispers grew louder. The tide of perception was shifting. But inside Malik, the storm still raged. Part of him wanted to slam the book on the table, shout his achievements, demand recognition. Another part, the stronger part, told him that his value did not depend on their applause. His dignity belonged to him alone. He thought of the performance awaiting him in Washington, the Kennedy Center stage, the lights, the audience hushed in anticipation. He thought of the piece he had been composing, one he planned to dedicate to children who were told they did not belong. Perhaps this moment would become part of that music, each note carrying the weight of prejudice transformed into grace. Sophia bent slightly, whispering so only he could hear. "Are you okay?" Malik nodded once. His voice, when it came, was steady. "I'm fine." But fine was not the truth. Fine was a shield. Inside, he was tired. Tired of being tested. Tired of knowing that no matter how he dressed, no matter what he achieved, someone would still see threat instead of child. He let his gaze settle back on the window, on the boundless horizon. Somewhere out there was the city waiting for him, the stage, the music, the recognition that could never erase moments like this, but could transform them into something larger. Passengers kept staring, whispering, searching, and slowly, very slowly, the balance of the cabin shifted. Doubt turned to realization. Silence turned to guilt. Malik Carter, with nothing more than stillness and composure, had begun to rewrite the narrative unfolding in seat 2A. The silence in the cabin did not last long. Victoria Hale filled it with her voice, sharp and grating, each word echoing louder than the engines outside. She sat stiff in her seat, her body angled away from Malik as though mere proximity to him carried danger. Her face, once composed in self-assured disdain, now contorted with theatrical outrage. "I will not sit here another second," she announced to no one in particular and everyone at once. "This boy does not belong in this cabin. You people need to listen to me before something terrible happens." The words carried an almost desperate urgency, the tone of someone trying to convince not just her audience, but herself. A low murmur rippled through the rows. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others pressed their phones higher, eager to capture every syllable of her unraveling tirade. The young mother across the aisle covered her daughter's ears. The businessman in 3C shook his head, but stayed silent, the weight of indecision heavy on his shoulders. Malik sat motionless, his hands resting neatly in his lap, his eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him. On the outside, he was still, composed, but inside his thoughts burned hot. Why did her words feel heavier than they should? Why did he feel as though the burden of proof rested on his shoulders, as if his very presence was a crime he needed to defend? He knew it was not his job to prove anything, yet the weight pressed down anyway. Sophia Bennett stepped forward again, her voice softer but firmer than before. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. You are disturbing the cabin." Victoria whipped her head around, eyes flashing. "Disturbing the cabin. He's the disturbance. Look at him, sitting there with electronics he couldn't possibly afford, pretending like he belongs here. I know exactly what's happening. This is some kind of scam. Probably stolen goods. Probably worse." Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going, feeding off her own momentum. "I saw the way he looked at me, all defiant. That's not how a child behaves unless he's hiding something. I've traveled enough to know what danger looks like. And that boy is danger." Passengers gasped audibly at the word danger, a word that carried consequences far beyond its syllables, especially when directed at a 12-year-old black boy. Malik's chest tightened. His father's words came back again, reminding him not to let anger define him. But the urge to shout surged in his throat, hot and urgent. He imagined slamming his fist down, telling her exactly who he was, daring her to keep going. He pictured the satisfaction of her silence, the look of shame he wanted to see on her face. For a moment, his breath came faster, his pulse racing. Then he remembered his mother's words at the gate. Dignity is armor. Don't let them strip it from you. He took a slow breath. Let the rage drain enough to think clearly. He turned his head slightly, just enough to face Victoria. His eyes met hers. No glare, no heat, just the steady gaze of someone who refused to be broken. That look unsettled her more than shouting ever could. She recoiled, her lips tightening into a thin line. Sophia spoke again, firmer this time. "Ma'am, you are out of line. Mr. Carter has done nothing wrong." But Victoria was too far gone to listen. Nothing wrong. Sitting there quietly like some kind of saint. That's the suspicious part. Real kids fidget. They talk. They act their age. He's too composed. Too quiet. It's not normal. That's how they trick you. The words made several passengers audibly groan. The businessman in 3C muttered, "Unbelievable." The college student in 4A whispered to her neighbor, "She's digging her own grave." But still, no one stood up to stop her. Malik felt the sting of her words, not because they were true, but because they revealed the impossible standard placed upon him. If he fidgeted, it would be proof of guilt. If he stayed calm, it was proof of deception. Every path led to suspicion. His dignity was not protection in her eyes, only another reason to attack. He lowered his gaze briefly to his hands. They were steady, but his stomach churned. He thought of all the times he had been told to be twice as good, twice as calm, twice as prepared, and even then, it might not be enough. Victoria raised her voice again. "Call the marshals, I demand it. Do you hear me? If you don't, you're putting every life on this plane at risk. And when something happens, it'll be on you." The words struck like a hammer. Risk. Every life on this plane. She had escalated from annoyance to full-blown accusation, wrapping her prejudice in the language of safety. The businessman in 3C slammed his newspaper shut. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're the only danger here. That boy has been quiet the whole flight. You're the one disturbing everyone." A murmur of agreement spread. The young mother across the aisle nodded, whispering, "That's right." The college student's phone shook in her hands as she captured it all. But Victoria, red-faced and trembling, doubled down. "Of course you'd say that. None of you see it, because you don't want to. But I know how these things work. And when this hits the news, remember I tried to warn you." Sophia's patience finally frayed. She straightened her shoulders, her voice firm and unyielding. "That's enough. Ms. Hale, I will not allow you to harass another passenger. If you cannot calm down, I will have no choice but to escalate this." Victoria's eyes widened in mock outrage. "Escalate this? You should be thanking me for protecting everyone. If you won't do your job, then I'll make sure someone who can is called." She jabbed the call button on her armrest with unnecessary force. The chime echoed through the cabin, a small sound that carried enormous weight. Within minutes, the decision she had forced would bring uniformed officers storming into the cabin. Malik sat quietly, his breathing slow, his posture straight, but inside, his thoughts were a battlefield. He felt the eyes of the entire cabin on him, weighing him, judging him. He wanted to shout, to defend, to demand recognition. But he also knew that silence sometimes spoke louder. He turned his gaze back to the window. The sky outside remained calm, endless, indifferent. He let it remind him that her words were not truth, only noise. He thought of his performance awaiting him in Washington, the music he would play, the people he would inspire. That vision steadied him more than anything else. Passengers whispered among themselves, the tide of sympathy shifting more clearly in his direction. But no one yet stood fully between him and Victoria. That silence, too, carried weight. Malik felt it press against him like another accusation, the silence of those who knew better but hesitated to act. The chime from Victoria's button echoed again in his memory. Soon, the footsteps would come. Soon, the men in uniform would arrive, and Malik Carter, 12 years old, would once again be asked to prove that he belonged. The sound of heavy footsteps down the narrow aisle was enough to silence even the hum of the engines. 3 men in dark uniforms moved with precision, their presence filling the cabin with a charge of fear and authority. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. The glow of phones shifted, cameras angled higher. Passengers knew instinctively that something extraordinary was about to unfold. At their center was Marshal Robert Ellis, a veteran whose face carried the weight of 15 years policing the skies. His jaw was square, his eyes sharp but tired, the kind of gaze that had seen everything from drunken brawls to genuine threats. Yet as he scanned the rows, he sensed something here was different. The tension was undeniable, but it did not smell like danger. It smelled like misunderstanding. Victoria Hale wasted no time. She half rose from her seat, gesturing wildly toward Malik. There he is. That's the boy. He shouldn't be here. I told you he was suspicious. Get him out of this cabin before it's too late. Her words tumbled over one another, fueled by adrenaline and conviction. To her, this was vindication, proof that her complaints had been taken seriously. She pointed with such force her bracelets jingled like alarms. Marshal Ellis raised one hand in a calm but commanding gesture. Ma'am, take your seat. We'll handle this. His voice was low, steady, authoritative without being loud. The kind of voice designed to settle chaos. Victoria obeyed, though her body vibrated with restless triumph. She had set events in motion and believed the outcome inevitable. Malik, meanwhile, sat perfectly still. His book was closed, his satchel resting by his leg. He looked at the officers with a calm that seemed too practiced for his age. Inside, though, his heart pounded. He thought of all the times he had been told to stay calm, to keep his hands visible, to use his words carefully. He thought of his mother's repeated reminders. You don't get the same margin for error as others. Marshal Ellis approached slowly, scanning Malik from head to toe. What he saw unsettled him, not a threat, not even defiance, but composure. The boy's shirt was crisp, his shoes polished, his hands steady in his lap. The watch on his wrist gleamed faintly under the cabin lights. On the tray table sat a pair of high-end headphones and a sleek tablet. Nothing about the scene suggested danger except for the raw hostility radiating from seat 2B. Ellis crouched slightly to level his eyes with Malik's. The gesture softened the edge of the uniforms, reminding everyone in the cabin that authority could bend when necessary. Son, he said evenly. Can you tell me your name? Malik Carter, came the reply, calm and respectful. His voice did not tremble, though inside he could feel the tight coil of nerves. And how old are you? Malik, 12. Sir. Ellis studied the boy's face. There was no panic, no guilt, no trace of deception. What he saw instead was quiet confusion, layered with dignity. the kind of expression he rarely saw in people 3 times the boy's age. Behind him, one of the junior officers shifted uncomfortably. He had expected a very different scene when they were summoned. This looked less like a threat and more like a child on the receiving end of something ugly. Victoria broke the silence with a sharp laugh. "Don't let him fool you. That's what they do. Quiet, polite, like butter wouldn't melt in their mouth. But it's an act. Look at all that expensive gear. Do you really believe a kid like that belongs in business class?" Her words spilled into the cabin like poison. Several passengers groaned audibly. The businessman in 3C muttered, "This is insane." The young mother hugged her daughter tighter. Ellis did not respond to Victoria. Instead, he kept his eyes on Malik. "Do you have your boarding pass and identification with you?" "Yes, sir." Malik's voice was steady. He reached slowly into his satchel, careful to make every movement visible, deliberate. His fingers brushed past the edges of his math book, the smooth surface of his tablet, before pulling out a neat folder. He placed it gently on the tray. Ellis opened it. Inside lay the boarding pass first class. Fully paid. No upgrade or discount. Alongside it was a passport thick with stamps, a global entry card, and an envelope embossed with an official seal. Ellis felt a flicker of recognition, though he could not place it immediately. He examined the documents, his trained eyes searching for inconsistencies. There were none. Everything was legitimate, precise, in order. He looked back at Malik, who waited quietly, his hands folded in his lap. Behind Ellis, the younger officers exchanged glances. They had come prepared to confront a threat. Instead, they were confronting a truth. This was a child, composed beyond his years, sitting where he belonged. Victoria, however, was not finished. Her voice rose again, shrill with desperation. "Don't be fooled. Kids like that don't travel alone in business class. This is a setup. He's probably part of some scam. You'll see. Just keep digging." The businessman in 3C finally spoke up, louder this time. "Marshal, with all due respect, this woman is the problem here. That boy hasn't said a word since we boarded. She's been yelling nonstop. If anyone needs to be removed, it's her." Murmurs of agreement spread. Passengers nodded, some speaking softly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The young woman in 4A whispered, "Unreal," as her phone continued recording. Ellis straightened slowly, the document still in his hand. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down. Years of experience told him when a situation was crooked, and this one was crooked from the start. The boy was not the threat. The threat was the hysteria fueled by prejudice in Seat 2B. He handed the boarding pass and identification back to Malik. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he said, his tone deliberate, respectful. "I appreciate your cooperation." The words hung in the air, carrying more weight than anyone expected. To call him Mr. Carter, to address him with dignity, was a small act of correction in a cabin that had been poisoned by assumptions. Malik nodded once, his face calm. Inside, relief and gratitude mixed with exhaustion. He wanted to thank the marshal, but his voice caught. Instead, he returned his gaze to the window, letting the endless horizon absorb the emotions he could not express. Victoria sputtered, "Mr. Carter, are you kidding me? You're just going to let him sit here. You can't be serious." Ellis turned to her, his voice cool and professional. "Ma'am, I've reviewed his documents. They are in order. There is no security issue here." The look on Victoria's face shifted from triumph to disbelief, then to fury. Her world, in which her accusations carried unquestioned authority, was beginning to crumble. But she was not done fighting. Not yet. Marshal Robert Ellis had returned Malik's documents, but the weight of the moment lingered in the air. Every passenger seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what would come next. The hum of the engines faded into the background, replaced by the thrum of human tension. Malik sat in silence, his hands folded neatly over the closed folder on his tray table. Outwardly, he was the picture of calm. Inwardly, he wrestled with emotions that threatened to break free. Fear, anger, exhaustion, even shame all churned inside him like a storm. He hated that he felt shame. He had done nothing wrong, but years of subtle lessons, of sidelong looks in stores, of teachers surprised by his brilliance, had etched a reflex deep inside him when accused, even unjustly. Part of him felt guilty. His father's voice returned in his memory. The world will try to tell you who you are. Don't let them. You tell the world who you are. Victoria Hale, however, could not accept silence as an answer. She leaned forward, eyes wild, her words a mix of rage and desperation. You're all being fooled. You think a child can just sit here with electronics worth thousands. You think a kid like that pays for a seat that costs more than some people's cars. Look at him. This is a setup. I'm telling you, he's lying. Her voice cracked on the last word, high-pitched and shrill. Several passengers groaned. The businessman in 3C muttered loudly, "Lady, give it up." A ripple of agreement moved through the rows. Phones captured every second, tiny red dots recording history. Malik felt the weight of their eyes, but he did not flinch. Instead, he reached slowly into his satchel again. Every movement was deliberate, visible, practiced. He pulled out a smaller leather wallet and slid a card across the tray to Marshal Ellis. Ellis picked it up, his brow furrowed as he read the embossed letters. Global Innovators Foundation, Youth Ambassador Malik Carter. He flipped it over. The card carried an official hologram, a direct contact number, and the kind of authenticity that was impossible to fake. Malik's voice was steady. "That's my foundation work, sir. We fund music programs for schools that can't afford instruments. It started as my idea. We've helped about 30,000 students so far." His words landed softly but powerfully. 30,000 students, a number that carried more weight than any accusation. Passengers exchanged startled glances. The young mother across the aisle whispered, "Oh my God." The college student in 4A lowered her phone slightly, her expression shifting from outrage to awe. Ellis looked back at the boy. "You run a foundation?" Malik nodded. "With my mom's help. She handles most of the business side. I write the code for the app, and I do the fundraising events. It's important to me." His voice wavered just slightly on the last line, betraying the exhaustion he fought to hide. But in that moment, his vulnerability only deepened the impression of his strength. Victoria let out a sharp laugh, brittle and mocking. "A foundation? Please, what's next? Is he going to tell us he's a senator? Don't fall for it." Her words rang hollow now. Where before some passengers had avoided her gaze, now they openly rolled their eyes, shook their heads, muttered their disapproval. The tide was turning. Malik inhaled slowly, steadying himself. He did not want to keep proving his worth like some performer on command, but he also knew that silence could be twisted. He opened the folder again and pulled out a thin sheet of paper, folded neatly. He slid it across to Ellis. The marshal unfolded it carefully. His eyes widened slightly. It was printed on White House letterhead, the seal embossed at the top. The letter was brief but powerful. It thanked Malik Carter for his contribution to American culture, praising his work in expanding music education to underserved communities. It bore the unmistakable signature of the president. Ellis blinked twice, making sure he wasn't imagining it. He had never expected to read such words about a boy barely 12 years old. Sitting quietly on an airplane, he handed it back with careful respect. "Mr. Carter," Ellis said. His tone shifted now to something closer to reverence than procedure. "Thank you for showing me this." The use of Mr. Carter again rippled through the cabin. Passengers sat straighter, recognizing the weight of formality. Victoria sputtered, her face red. "That's fake. It has to be. Do you really think some kid would have a letter from the president?" The businessman in 3C turned sharply. "Do you really think we can't all Google his name right now? Maybe you should try it." He raised his phone, scrolling. His eyes widened. "Yep. Here he is. Malik Carter. Prodigy. Kennedy Center. Forbes profile. It's all right here." Gasps and murmurs spread as other passengers pulled out their devices. Screens lit up with headlines, images, videos. Malik at a piano on a national stage. Malik speaking at a TED conference, his hands moving expressively as he described his app. Malik shaking hands with senators, receiving medals, standing beside his mother at charity events. The shift in the cabin was palpable. Respect replaced doubt. Awe replaced suspicion. And through it all, Malik sat quietly, his gaze still fixed on the window. Inside, though, his thoughts tumbled. He hated that his worth had to be measured in articles and achievements, in signatures and titles. He hated that the truth of his humanity, that he was a child, that he was innocent, had not been enough. He wondered how many others sat in seats like his, without folders of proof, without foundations or accolades, and suffered silently. The thought ached in his chest. Ellis leaned closer, his voice quieter now. "Just for Malik. I'm sorry, son. This shouldn't have happened." Malik turned to meet his eyes. "It always happens, just not always here." His words were soft, but heavy, carrying a wisdom far beyond his years. Ellis nodded slowly, the truth of it pressing down on him. He had spent his career responding to threats, but now he saw the threat was not Malik. It was the prejudice that had dragged a boy into this spotlight. Victoria, seeing the tide turn fully against her, grew frantic. "You're all blind. You just don't want to admit you're being conned. He's tricking you, tricking all of you." Her voice cracked. Passengers openly shushed her now. The young mother across the aisle said firmly, "Enough. We're not blind. We see exactly what you're doing." The college student lowered her phone, her voice steady, "And the whole world will see it too." Victoria's face paled as she realized the implications. Every second of her rant had been recorded, broadcast ready for the court of public opinion. Malik lowered his eyes, his voice a whisper. Even he wasn't sure he wanted anyone to hear. "I just wanted to read my book." The words cut sharper than any accusation. A boy who only wanted to read, who only wanted peace, dragged into a storm not of his making. Passengers felt the sting of guilt again, recognizing their silence, their delay in speaking up. But Malik did not linger on guilt. He straightened, folding his papers neatly, sliding them back into his folder with the same calm precision. He had nothing left to prove. His very existence, his quiet strength, was proof enough. And the cabin, slowly, began to understand that. For a long stretch, no one spoke. The only sounds were the low hum of the engines and the faint buzz of phones recording every detail. The tension was unbearable, like the whole cabin was holding a single breath, waiting to see who would exhale first. It was the businessman in 3C who broke the silence. He stood not all the way, but just enough for his voice to carry with authority. "Enough is enough," he said, his tone clipped, the kind that belonged in boardrooms and negotiations. "This boy has been nothing but respectful. We've all seen it, and we've all heard you. Miss Hale, you've crossed every line of decency. Frankly, it's disgraceful." The ripple through the cabin was immediate. Passengers nodded, murmurs of agreement spreading like fire on dry grass. It was as if his words had given permission for others to finally release what they'd been holding back. The young mother across the aisle leaned into the aisle itself, her voice firm despite the quaver of emotion beneath it. "You've been attacking a child, and you've terrified my daughter with your shouting. You should be ashamed." Her little girl, wide-eyed, peeked over the seat and whispered softly, "He didn't do anything." That whisper carried more weight than any argument. Victoria Hale's face flushed crimson, her lips tightening. "You're all blind. You don't know how the world works. People like him." The sentence never finished. The businessman snapped his hand into the air like a gavel. "Don't you dare! Not another word like that." Phones caught the exchange from multiple angles, red recording lights reflecting in the polished cabin windows. Malik sat still, but inside, his chest tightened. Relief mingled with sadness. He was grateful for their voices, yet wounded by the delay. Why had it taken so long? Why had they needed proof? Headlines, a letter from the president. Before defending him, he wondered how many people in his community never got that proof, never had allies stand up. He thought of something his grandmother had once told him. Some people need to be shown the truth. Others need the truth to be undeniable before they'll speak. Tonight, it seemed, the truth had become undeniable. The college student in 4A finally lowered her phone, holding it steady on her lap but keeping the camera rolling. Her voice was strong now, almost trembling with conviction. "I've been recording since the beginning. And when this hits the internet, everyone will see who you really are. Ms. Hale. Everyone will see what you said to a 12-year-old boy." Victoria's hand shook. For the first time, doubt crept into her eyes. She looked around the cabin and realized the tide had shifted. No longer silent witnesses. The passengers were united against her. Marshal Ellis spoke up, his voice measured but unmistakably firm. "Ma'am, the passengers are correct. Mr. Carter has done nothing wrong. Your behavior has disrupted this cabin far more than his presence ever could." He let the words hang for a moment. Then, deliberately, he shifted his body so that he stood slightly between Malik and Victoria. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable. A line had been drawn. Malik felt the weight lift from his chest, though only slightly. He looked at Ellis's back, broad and steady, and felt something unfamiliar but comforting protection. Yet even then, his mind wrestled with conflicting feelings. Should he be grateful for protection that had been so slow in coming? Shouldn't the truth of his innocence have been enough from the start? The young mother's daughter tugged at Malik's sleeve shyly. When he glanced over, she whispered, "I like your watch." For the first time since the ordeal began, Malik smiled. It was small, fleeting, but real. The innocence of the child, untainted by prejudice, pierced through the tension like sunlight breaking clouds. Victoria, however, was unraveling. She clutched at her pearls, her voice rising into hysteria. "You'll all regret this. You'll see. This is how disasters happen when people ignore the signs. When people like me try to warn you." The businessman scoffed, his voice cutting her off. "The only disaster here is your behavior." A few passengers clapped, softly at first, then louder. It wasn't applause for a performance, but a release of pressure, a recognition that justice, at least in this cabin, was beginning to find its footing. Malik's heart swelled at the sound, though he kept his expression calm. Inside, though, he thought, why clap now? Where was this energy when I sat here alone? Sophia Bennett, the flight attendant who had endured Victoria's tirade from the start, finally allowed herself a small sigh of relief. She stepped closer to Malik, her hand resting gently on the back of his seat. "You've handled this with more grace than most adults ever could," she whispered. Malik nodded once, his voice low but steady. "I just wanted to read my book." That single sentence, so simple and so devastating, silenced the cabin once more. Phones recorded, but no one spoke. Every adult present felt the sting of guilt in their chest. Victoria's voice cracked as she tried again. "He's manipulating you. Can't you see it? He's too calm, too smart, too polished. It's not normal." Malik turned his head slowly, finally facing her directly. His eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence was more powerful than words, the quiet strength of someone who refused to bow to ignorance. Victoria faltered under his gaze. Her lips quivered. Her breath hitched. For the first time, she looked unsure. The college student leaned forward, her voice firm. "You should stop talking now, Ms. Hale. The world is watching." The phrase struck like a bell. The world is watching. Malik closed his eyes briefly. He thought of his mother, of her songs that carried messages of strength and resilience across the globe. He thought of the countless children who looked up to him, who downloaded his app, who believed that brilliance could come from anywhere. He knew this moment wasn't just about him, it was about them, too. He whispered softly, more to himself than anyone else. "They'll know we belong." Ellis heard it, though, and the words stayed with him. They pierced through his years of training, through the layers of procedure and policy. They weren't just words from a child. They were truth. The businessman sat down finally, folding his arms. "I hope your employer sees this," he said toward Victoria. "I hope they see who you are when you think no one's watching." Her face drained of color. She looked at her phone, buzzing relentlessly with notifications. She knew the videos were already spreading. Her life was unraveling in real time, and she could do nothing to stop it. Malik opened his book again, sliding his bookmark neatly back into place. He smoothed the page with his palm and began to read. The gesture was quiet, almost ordinary, but in context, it was extraordinary. It was his declaration he would not be defined by her accusations, but by his own path, his own dignity. The passengers watched him, some with admiration, others with guilt, but all with a dawning recognition that they were witnessing something much larger than a mid-air dispute. They were witnessing strength, the kind that did not shout, the kind that did not need to. The silence in the cabin had settled like a heavy blanket when suddenly a sharp vibration broke through. A phone buzzed on Malik's tray table, its screen lighting up against the dim glow of the overhead lamps. The passengers closest to him could see the name displayed Mom, but it wasn't just the word. It was the photograph attached to it. Gas rippled across the rows. The image was unmistakable. Her face had graced billboards, award stages, late-night television, a woman whose voice had filled stadiums, whose songs had broken records, a voice known across the world. It was Simone Carter. For years she had been called the Queen of Soul Pop, winner of multiple Grammys, philanthropist, activist, entrepreneur. She wasn't just a celebrity, she was a cultural icon. The young woman in 4A dropped her phone into her lap. "No way," she whispered, loud enough for the row to hear. "That's Simone Carter." The businessman's jaw fell slack. Even the young mother, who hadn't followed music in years, recognized her instantly. And as the murmurs spread, so did the weight of realization. The boy sitting quietly with a book wasn't just Mullick Carter, prodigy and innovator. He was the son of Simone Carter. Victoria's face contorted. She leaned forward, her words sharp and panicked. "That's fake. That has to be fake. Anyone can put a photo on a contact. He probably stole her picture from the internet." Her protests sounded brittle now, desperate and hollow. Nobody echoed them. Mullick glanced at the screen, then at Marshall Ellis. His voice was quiet, but sure. "May I answer?" "She's waiting for an update." Ellis nodded firmly. "Go ahead, son." Mullick picked up the phone, pressing it to his ear with the composure of someone much older than 12. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice calm. "Yes, I'm fine. There's been a little misunderstanding, but it's under control." The passengers leaned in, straining to catch fragments, even through the phone's tinny speaker. Simone's voice was unmistakable rich, melodic, commanding attention without trying. "What do you mean, misunderstanding?" she asked. "They called security on you, Mullick. Are you safe?" Her tone shifted quickly, from maternal worry to steel. "Put me on speaker, now." Mullick obeyed, the cabin filled with her voice, powerful even through the tiny device. "This is Simone Carter. Who is in charge there?" All eyes snapped to Ellis. He cleared his throat. Professional, but suddenly aware he was speaking to one of the most famous women in the world. "Ma'am, this is Marshal Robert Ellis. I can assure you, your son is safe. There was an unfounded accusation. It has been handled." "Unfounded accusation." Simone's voice sharpened. "Do you understand how dangerous it is to treat a child like a threat?" My child Ellis hesitated. He had dealt with angry parents, angry executives, angry passengers. But this was different. This was a woman whose words could reach millions in hours. "Yes, ma'am. I understand. And I take full responsibility for ensuring his safety for the remainder of this flight." Simone exhaled audibly through the line. Then her voice softened, directed back toward her son. "Malik, are you okay? Tell me honestly." Malik's eyes flickered down, then up again. "Steady? I'm fine, Mom. Really, I don't want this to become a big deal. I have the performance tonight." Performance. The word lingered in the cabin like a spark waiting for oxygen. The businessman blinked. Performance. He whispered to himself, but Mullick wasn't finished. The Kennedy Center. "Remember, they're expecting me. The documentary crew is already there. I can't miss it." Whispers swelled. The Kennedy Center. Documentary crew. Suddenly, the scale of who Malik was became undeniable. Victoria's hands trembled. She shook her head violently. "No, this isn't real. It can't be real. This is some elaborate scam. You're all falling for it." Simone's voice cut through her rant like a blade. "Who is that? Who has been tormenting my son?" No one answered, but every head turned toward Victoria. Her face flushed deep red, her pearls quivering on her neck as she realized she had been fully exposed. Simone continued, her tone laced with icy control. "Let me be clear. My son has every right to be where he is. He paid for his seat, and he carries himself with more dignity than most adults I've met in this industry. If anyone has a problem with that, then perhaps they should take a long look at themselves." The businessman clapped once, loudly. Others followed. Soon the cabin echoed with applause, not for Simone alone, but for the truth she spoke, for the vindication Malik deserved. Malik lowered the phone from speaker, speaking softly to his mother again. "It's okay, Mom. Really, I don't want this to overshadow tonight. I'd rather people focus on the music than this." His words were gentle, but his heart ached. He wanted her comfort, yet he didn't want to feed the fire. He didn't want to be just a headline. Simone's voice softened once more, laced with pride. "That's exactly why I'm proud of you. Not for your talent, not even for your achievements, but for the way you carry yourself." Malik smiled faintly, though exhaustion pulled at his features. "Thanks, Mom. I'll call you when we land. Promise me," she said. "I promise." They exchanged goodbyes, and Malik ended the call, placing the phone face down on the tray. The cabin remained silent, the echo of Simone's words still hanging in the recycled air. Marshal Ellis cleared his throat again, addressing the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've all witnessed that there was never a threat here. Mr. Carter is a valued passenger, and this situation is resolved." Another round of murmurs, this time tinged with guilt. People realized just how far this had spiraled because they hadn't spoken soon enough. Victoria sat frozen, her eyes darting from face to face. Her phone buzzed in her lap, notifications pouring in. She unlocked it, and her heart sank. Her name was already trending. Clips of her ranting had spread to social media before the plane had even begun its descent. First-class races flashed on her screen, followed by hundreds of comments. Her breath quickened. "This can't be happening," she muttered. "It's not fair." Malik heard her words. For a moment, anger surged within him. He wanted to tell her what wasn't fair, that his innocence had been questioned, that he had been treated like a criminal, that he had needed proof of fame and power to be left alone. But he swallowed the words. He had nothing to prove to her. Instead, he reopened his book, sliding the bookmark in place, smoothing the crease of the page. The gesture was simple, but in its simplicity, it was defiant. He would not be defined by her prejudice. He would define himself by his own quiet strength. Passengers watched, captivated. Some nodded in respect. Others looked away, ashamed, and Victoria alone, shrinking in her seat, realized that the entire cabin had turned against her. The boy she had tried to erase was the one whose presence now filled the space with dignity, and the world beyond that cabin was already waiting for his story. Sophia Bennett stood at the front of the cabin, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled on her crew-issued tablet. She had kept her professional mask firmly in place during the entire ordeal, but now her composure cracked. Her eyes widened as each new headline appeared. She glanced at Malik, then back at the glowing screen, her lips parting as though she were about to speak, but couldn't quite believe the words herself. "Ladies and gentlemen," she finally said, her voice carrying more tremor than authority, I think you should all see this." She turned the tablet so Marshal Ellis could view it. His brows knit together, then lifted in shock. One headline after another filled the display. Young genius Malik Carter to receive Congressional Medal of Excellence. 12-year-old innovator revolutionizes music education for underserved communities. Prodigy builds app used in 47 states to teach music in schools. Gaffes traveled through the rows like dominoes falling. The businessman in 3C leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Congressional medal, he echoed, disbelief softening into awe. Sophia scrolled further, her finger shaking. Another headline appeared, brighter, more sensational. Forbes names Malik Carter, youngest ever, on 30, under 30 list. The image accompanying it left no room for doubt. Malik Mo standing in a tailored suit, smiling modestly beside industry titans decades older. Passengers fumbled for their phones, typing his name with urgency, one by one. Their screens lit up with confirmation. Articles, interviews, TED Talks, performance clips, all undeniable. Malik Carter wasn't just some precocious kid. He was an international figure, his achievements documented across every major media outlet. The young mother pressed a hand to her mouth. "I've read about him," she whispered to her husband. "That's the boy who built that app. Our school district just adopted it last year." Her daughter, eyes wide with wonder, tugged at her sleeve. "That's him, the boy from the video who showed how to make music with your fingers." The mother nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Meanwhile, the businessman scrolled furiously, his jaw tightening. "Why, this is insane," he muttered. "I watched this kid on 60 Minutes last month. He was talking about algorithms like it was nothing, and now here he is, being treated like a criminal on a plane." Across the aisle. The college student's phone dinged with a clip she pulled up instantly. She gasped. "He performed the national anthem at the Super Bowl," she said, her voice climbing in disbelief. 6 months ago, millions of people saw him. All eyes turned toward Malik. He sat quietly, his hands folded over the closed book on his lap, eyes still cast toward the window. His stillness only heightened the gravity of the moment. He wasn't basking in their recognition. He wasn't performing. He was simply himself, poised, humble, unwilling to gloat even as his truth outshined every accusation. Victoria Hale's world, however, was collapsing. Her face blanched as she realized passengers weren't just looking at Malik anymore. They were looking at her with disgust. Phones recorded her every twitch, every bead of sweat. Online, her name was already being linked to hashtags she couldn't escape. First-class racist. Don't be a Deanne. Malik Carter. She tried again, her voice breaking. This doesn't prove anything. It's all fake news. Do you really believe a child could accomplish all that? The businessman turned, his voice sharp as glass. We don't just believe it. We can see it. We can see him. And we can see you. The cabin murmured agreement, the collective energy turning fully against her. Malik finally turned from the window, his gaze landing on Sophia's tablet. He saw his own face reflected back at him in articles, smiling in photos taken at ceremonies he barely remembered. For a moment, he felt detached, as if he were looking at another boy's life. Inside, though, a familiar ache pressed against his ribs. Why does it take all of this to prove I belong here? Why isn't my word, my presence, my humanity enough? He wanted to disappear into his book, to escape the spotlight, but the cabin's attention pressed on him like a physical weight. Sophia's voice wavered as she read aloud another excerpt from the tablet. At age 11, Malik Carter developed a groundbreaking algorithm that's transforming how music is taught. His app has been downloaded over 10 million times. He's donated millions in instruments to underserved schools. He's already changed more lives than most of us will in a lifetime. Her voice cracked, and for a moment she had to look away. The little girl, who had admired Malik's watch earlier, leaned into the aisle again. "Can I shake your hand?" she asked timidly. The cabin stilled, waiting. Malik's expression softened. He closed his book and turned toward her fully for the first time. "Of course," he said gently. She stepped forward, her small hand trembling, and he clasped it lightly, warmth radiating from the gesture. He didn't just shake her hand. He leaned in, speaking softly, so only she and her parents could hear. "Keep learning. Keep dreaming. You can do anything." The little girl's eyes lit up. Her mother's tears finally spilled. It was a moment so tender, so human, that phones capturing it would later be shared millions of times. The boy wrongly accused of being a threat became, in that simple handshake, a symbol of inspiration. Meanwhile, Victoria sat frozen, clutching her pearls so tightly they dug into her skin. She tried to open her phone, perhaps to retreat into denial, but what she found only worsened her panic. Her social media accounts were already flooded angry comments, demands for her firing, strangers calling her every name in the book. She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Marshall Ellis watched her with a grim expression, then looked back at Malik. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly, "I don't think words can undo what you've endured here, but I will say this. You've taught us all something tonight." Malik met his gaze. His voice was steady, almost weary. "I didn't want to teach. I just wanted to read my book." The cabin sank into silence once again. His words pierced deeper than any lecture could have. Sophia whispered to Ellis, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "We'll never live this down. The world is already watching." And she was right. Outside the sealed aluminum tube of the aircraft, the digital wildfire had already begun. Videos uploaded mid-flight spread across social media. News outlets prepared breaking stories, and hashtags climbed trends lists at lightning speed. But inside the cabin, the lesson unfolded in real-time dignity could not be erased by prejudice, and truth had a way of revealing itself no matter how loudly lies shouted. Victoria Hale slumped in her seat, her face ghostly white. For the first time, she said nothing, and that silence was louder than all her accusations combined. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft leveled out from a mild patch of turbulence, but the air inside business class was still charged. Nobody looked at their screens. Nobody sipped their drinks. Nobody dared to recline. Every eye was fixed on the unfolding drama. Marshall Ellis had stepped aside, speaking quietly into his radio for several minutes. His face betrayed nothing, but his stance was tense, rigid. He was no longer simply handling an incident, he was relaying developments that were now far above his pay grade. When he returned, his tone was different, official, rehearsed, as if he had been briefed from corporate headquarters itself. He stood tall in the aisle, cleared his throat, and addressed the cabin with measured gravity. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. The airline has been informed of this situation in detail. After careful review and consultation with senior leadership, we are prepared to make an official statement right now." The businessman in 3C leaned forward, arms folded across his chest. The young mother hugged her daughter close. The college student lifted her phone a little higher, camera still rolling. Ellis's voice grew louder, carrying through the hushed cabin. "First, on behalf of the airline, I want to extend our deepest apologies to Mr. Malik Carter. No child, no passenger, should ever endure what he has endured here tonight. His conduct has been exemplary, his documentation completely legitimate, and his presence here is not only valid, It is valued. A wave of applause broke out. This time, it wasn't hesitant. It was full, sustained, cathartic. Malik sat still, his hands folded over his book. His face didn't shift into pride or anger. He just inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the apology with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout. Ellis continued, his gaze cutting briefly toward Victoria Hale. Secondly, the airline has determined that the disruption and distress caused by one passenger cannot be overlooked. Effective immediately. Ms. Hale, you are placed on the airline's restricted list. After this flight, you will no longer be permitted to fly with us. The gasp that tore through the cabin was unanimous. Even Malik looked up sharply, surprise flickering across his face. Victoria froze, her body stiff as if she'd been struck. What she shrieked, her voice cracking. You can't do that. I'm a loyal customer. I'm Platinum Elite. I've flown 1,000,000 miles with this airline. Her protests only emphasized the absurdity of her entitlement. Ellis remained unmoved, platinum or not. Ms. Hale, your behavior has violated our code of conduct. We do not tolerate harassment or discrimination of any kind, especially when directed toward children. This decision is final. Victoria shook her head violently, panic overtaking fury. She clutched her pearls, gasping like someone drowning. Do you have any idea what this will do to me? I travel every week for work. I need this airline. The businessman in 3C spoke without sympathy. Maybe you should have thought of that before attacking a kid. Laughter, sharp and bitter, rippled through the rows. Phones tilted toward Victoria, capturing every twitch of her unraveling. Her phone buzzed on her tray table, vibrating with relentless force. She snatched it up, only to see dozens of notifications calls from colleagues, messages from friends, her name trending online. The hashtags burned into her eyes. Faux first-class racist. Bo, grounded for life. Her voice broke into a whimper. This isn't fair. This isn't who I am. I was just trying to what the college student in 4A shot back, her tone slicing. Trying to humiliate a 12-year-old trying to remind us all that you think money and skin color determine who belongs where we all heard you. You can't rewrite what's on tape. Victoria collapsed back into her seat, staring at the floor, her entire body shaking. Ellis resumed, his professionalism steady. Additionally, the airline will be making a donation to the Carter Foundation in recognition of Mr. Carter's work in education and the arts. We are committed to ensuring that this incident is not only acknowledged, but transformed into something constructive. The applause this time thundered. People clapped, cheered, even stood in their rows. The sound filled the cabin until it felt like the walls themselves vibrated with recognition. Malik felt heat rise in his cheeks. He hadn't asked for donations, hadn't asked for vindication. He just wanted peace. Yet as he looked around at the passengers, at their contrite faces, at their newfound resolve, he realized something larger was unfolding. His ordeal was no longer just about him. It had become a mirror, forcing everyone on board to confront who they were in moments of truth. He thought of the girl who had shaken his hand, of her small voice saying she wanted to learn. He thought of all the children in underserved schools using his app, never knowing his face, only knowing his work. Maybe this moment would ripple outward to them too, showing them that even when prejudice tries to erase you, truth could not be silenced. Victoria, meanwhile, spiraled further. She fumbled with her phone again, trying to call someone, her assistant, her employer, anyone who could salvage her crumbling reputation. No one answered, Sophia Bennett, standing a few feet away, addressed her directly now. Miss Hale, you should know that the airline has already flagged this incident to other carriers. It's common practice. If you think you can just book elsewhere, you might be in for a surprise. Victoria's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time all evening, she was utterly speechless. The young mother across the aisle leaned into Malik, her voice soft but fierce. I'm so sorry we didn't speak up sooner. You've shown us all what courage looks like. Malik nodded politely, though his thoughts churned. Why does courage have to look like silence? Why do people only speak when the world is already watching? He wanted to forgive, but he also wanted change, real change, not just apologies in the heat of public shame. Captain Rodriguez's voice suddenly boomed over the intercom, calm but resonant. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are aware of the situation in business class. On behalf of the flight deck and this airline, I extend our apologies to Mr. Carter. We are honored to have him on board tonight. Please join me in recognizing his contributions not just as a passenger, but as someone who represents the best of what our nation has to offer. The cabin erupted. Applause rolled through like thunder. Some passengers even whistled. Others called Malik's name softly, like a chant of solidarity. Victoria shrank deeper into her seat, covering her face with trembling hands. The sound of celebration for Malik was, for her, the sound of her own destruction. Malik sat still, letting the applause wash over him but not consume him. His fingers traced the edge of his book. His mind drifted briefly to his upcoming performance, to the music waiting inside him, to the piece he'd written in secret that no one had yet heard. Grace notes, he had called it. And perhaps, he thought, grace was exactly what the world needed most tonight. When the applause finally subsided, Ellis made one last statement. This matter is officially closed in the cabin. We ask that passengers respect Mr. Carter's privacy for the remainder of the flight. And Ms. Hale, consider this your notice. Actions have consequences. With that, he returned to his post, leaving the cabin buzzing with quiet conversation. Phones continued recording. Fingers tapped out tweets. But the balance of power had shifted completely. The boy who had once been accused now sat vindicated, dignified, untouchable, and the woman who had wielded prejudice like a weapon now sat grounded, her wings clipped at 30,000 feet. The hum of the engine softened as the captain announced their initial descent. Outside the windows, streaks of orange and violet bled into the horizon, the sun bowing low as if it, too, were exhausted from the storm inside the cabin. Passengers shifted, seat belts clicked, but the mood in business class was unlike any descent most had ever experienced. The air held the fragile weight of remorse, awe, and something approaching reverence. Malik sat motionless, his book unopened now, resting quietly on his lap. His eyes were distant, fixed somewhere far beyond the fading clouds. For the first time since the ordeal began, his shoulders sagged slightly. It was the exhaustion of a boy who had carried the burden of dignity long past what anyone his age should have to endure. His phone buzzed again. A call. The same name appeared on the screen. Mom. He hesitated, glancing at Marshal Ellis. The marshal nodded once, a small gesture of assurance. Malik pressed accept. Hi, Mom, he said softly, this time without speakerphone. Her voice poured through, warm and trembling with worry. Baby, I just watched the clip. It's everywhere. Are you sure you're okay? Malik's lips curved faintly. I'm okay. Really. I want to land and move forward. I don't want this to become bigger than it already is. But Simone Carter was not a woman easily convinced. It's already bigger. Moloch. The whole world is watching. News crews are waiting at the airport. Journalists are calling me nonstop. People are furious. They're demanding accountability. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. His voice lowered. I don't want hate to be the headline. I don't want her. He glanced discreetly toward Victoria to be remembered more than the music. There was a pause. Then Simone's voice softened, filled with maternal pride. That's why you're different. That's why you're special. You carry yourself with grace when most adults would lash out. But baby, you're allowed to feel hurt. You're allowed to be angry. He swallowed, emotion rising in his throat. I know, but if I let anger take over, then I lose the part of me that makes the music real, and I can't afford to lose that. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Simone whispered, You're stronger than me sometimes. Malik smiled faintly. I learned it from you. Their goodbye was tender, filled with the kind of love that words could only brush against. When he hung up, Malik sat still for a long moment, clutching the phone in both hands, as if grounding himself. Passengers around him had heard fragments, caught his tone, and felt the gravity. A woman 2 rows back whispered to her seatmate, He talks like he's 40, not 12. The businessman finally rose, walking down the aisle until he stood beside Malik. He cleared his throat, uneasy, but his eyes were damp. Young man, I owe you an apology. I sat here and said nothing while that woman attacked you. I thought it wasn't my place. But silence is complicity. I failed you. Moloch looked up, his brown eyes calm but piercing. You're apologizing now. That matters. The businessman shook his head. It doesn't erase what you endured. No, Moloch said, his voice steady. But maybe it changes what you'll do next time. The word struck the man like a blow. He nodded, unable to speak further, and returned to his seat with a hand pressed to his chest. One by one, others came forward. The young mother brought her daughter again. She wants to say thank you. The little girl gripped Malik's hand, her small voice clear. Thank you for not giving up. Malik squeezed her hand gently. Don't you give up either. No matter who tells you that you don't belong, you keep going. Promise me. I promise, she whispered, and her mother's tears returned. The college student leaned across the aisle, her phone recording, but her tone sincere. I live-streamed part of what happened. I thought people needed to see it. But I realize now I should have spoken up first, not just pulled out my camera. I'm sorry. Malik nodded. Sometimes showing the truth is speaking up. You helped make sure the world couldn't ignore it. Her lip trembled as she smiled, relief washing over her. Even Sophia Bennett, the flight attendant, knelt by his seat. Her voice was low, emotional. Mr. Carter. Moloch? I should have intervened sooner. I let procedure keep me quiet when humanity should have spoken. That will never happen again. Moloch studied her face. He could see the sincerity, the guilt, the exhaustion. You're speaking now, he said gently. That's a start. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, Thank you. Through it all. Victoria Hale remained rigid in her seat, a ghost of the woman who had once commanded the aisle with venom, her hands twisted in her lap, her face pale, her lips pressed tight. She wanted to speak, but every time she opened her mouth, the words withered. At last. She rose shakily, clutching the headrest for balance. Her voice cracked as she faced Malik. I I don't know what to say. I thought I was protecting my space. I thought. Her throat closed, but I was wrong. I was cruel. And now I've lost everything because of it. The cabin watched, silent, waiting. Malik met her eyes. His heart thudded with the weight of choice whether to condemn or to forgive. He thought of the pain she had caused, the humiliation, the fear. He thought of the little girl he had promised to inspire. He thought of his mother's words, "You're allowed to be angry." He drew a slow breath. "You don't need my forgiveness to move on. What you need is to change, not because you lost something, but because what you did hurt someone. If you can learn that, then maybe losing everything won't be the end. It'll be the beginning." Her lips trembled. She nodded once, then collapsed back into her seat, tears finally spilling. The cabin exhaled as if a great weight had lifted. The captain's voice returned over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are on final approach. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We expect a smooth landing. But for those in business class, the descent was anything but ordinary. They had entered the sky with prejudice and silence. They were returning to Earth with lessons carved into their consciences, etched by the quiet strength of a 12-year-old boy. Malik leaned back at last, closing his eyes. He didn't feel victorious. He felt drained, raw, uncertain of the storm awaiting him on the ground. Yet somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope burned that maybe, just maybe, this ordeal would spark something bigger than himself. As the wheels prepared to meet the runway, Malik whispered under his breath, words only he could hear. "Let this be more than a story. Let it be a change." The engines roared. The city lights grew brighter, and the boy who had endured injustice with grace braced for what awaited him on the ground. The jolt of the wheels kissing the runway sent a ripple through the cabin. Passengers exhaled in unison, not from turbulence, but from the emotional storm that had passed through them at 30,000 feet. The engines roared as the plane slowed, and for a moment, the ordinary rhythm of landing felt surreal compared to the extraordinary journey they had just endured. Malik Carter sat upright, seatbelts secure. His small hands folded neatly over his book. His face was calm, but his chest rose and fell with a subtle weight. He knew something waited outside those doors. The glances from the flight attendants, the tension in Marshall Ellis's posture, the way phones buzzed nonstop. It all told him that the ordeal on board was already spilling into the wider world. Captain Rodriguez's voice returned, steady and respectful. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We ask that all passengers remain seated as special arrangements will be made. Please give us your patience as we ensure a smooth and safe deplaning." Whispers broke out. Heads turned toward Malik. Even in their curiosity, there was reverence. Through the oval windows, flashes of light could be seen news vans lined up along the tarmac, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. A red carpet was unrolled near the jet bridge, a crowd of reporters corralled by security barriers. Among them, a figure in a tailored Navy suit stood with unmistakable poise. Malik's heart skipped. His mother, Simone, waiting for him. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed off, but no one moved. Instead, Ellis walked the aisle once more, his tone clear. "Passengers, we ask that you remain seated to allow Mr. Carter to disembark first. Thank you for your cooperation." The businessman in 3C nodded firmly. "Of course," the young mother whispered to her daughter. "Watch closely, sweetheart. You're seeing history." Victoria Hale shrank against the window, her face pale, her phone vibrating ceaselessly with messages she dared not open. The cabin no longer saw her as powerful or entitled. She was simply the shadow of a woman who had lost everything in 7 minutes of hatred. Sophia Bennett approached Malik, her voice trembling but warm. "It's time." He stood, adjusting his crisp button down, slipping his book and satchel into place. He didn't rush. He moved with the same quiet composure that had carried him through humiliation, scrutiny, and vindication. The cabin erupted into applause so loud, so sustained, that even the roar of engines couldn't drown it out. Malik walked the aisle, his small frame passing between towering adults who now looked at him with respect, even awe. Some whispered blessings, others mouthed apologies. A few simply nodded, acknowledging the weight of what he had carried. At the door, Captain Rodriguez waited, hat tucked under his arm. He extended his hand. "Mr. Carter, it has been an honor to fly you tonight. The skies are brighter with passengers like you." Malik shook his hand, murmuring, "Thank you, Captain." The jet bridge door opened. A wall of flashes, voices, and microphones surged forward, only to be held back by uniformed security. Malik stepped out, and the cheers began. Reporters shouted his name, cameras clicked furiously, and beyond the chaos, his mother broke through. Simone Carter ran forward, her heels clattering against the floor, her arms wide. Malik dropped his bag, collapsing into her embrace. She held him so tightly the world seemed to vanish. For a moment, it wasn't about headlines, cameras, or justice. It was just a mother holding her son after a storm she couldn't shield him from. Tears streaked Simone's cheeks as she cupped his face. "You're safe. You're safe. That's all that matters." Malik managed a small smile. "I told you I'd be okay." Behind them, the mayor approached, flanked by aides. He carried a small velvet box and a proclamation scroll. His voice carried through the terminal microphones. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we welcome Malik Carter, a young man who has endured prejudice with dignity and turned injustice into a lesson for us all. On behalf of this city, I present him the key to the city, not just as recognition of his genius, but of his grace." Applause thundered. Malik accepted the symbolic key, his face calm but eyes glistening. Then came the questions, reporters leaning forward, microphones thrust like swords. "Malik, how did you stay so calm? Do you forgive the passenger who accused you? What message do you have for children watching this?" Malik straightened. His voice was soft but carried through the microphones. "I stayed calm because I didn't want to lose myself in someone else's hate. Anger is easy, grace is harder, but grace is what changes things." The terminal grew still. Cameras captured every syllable. As for forgiveness, he paused, his gaze flicking briefly to the plane where Victoria remained hidden. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about refusing to carry their burden with you. I don't excuse what was said, but I refuse to let it define me. I hope she learns. I hope we all learn, a reporter asked. "What do you say to other kids who face discrimination?" Malik's voice deepened with conviction. "Excellence is the best answer to prejudice. Don't let anyone tell you where you don't belong. Show them through what you do, through who you are. Talent has no color. Dignity has no price. And belonging isn't given, it's claimed." The words struck like lightning. They were quoted, replayed, tweeted within seconds. The boy who had been treated as a threat was now the voice of a movement. Back on the plane, Victoria finally emerged, sunglasses hastily pulled over tear-streaked eyes. But reporters spotted her instantly. Questions rained down. "Ms. Hale, Do you regret your actions? Do you want to apologize publicly? She pushed forward, her head bowed. But in her haste she stumbled, falling to her knees, her belongings scattered across the floor, her pearls snapping, beads rolling across the polished tile. Cameras caught it all, her collapse just yards away from Malik's triumph. Passengers watching from the terminal screens murmured at the contrast. A boy rises. A woman falls. Justice in motion. But Malik, seeing her falter on a nearby monitor, whispered to his mother, "Can someone help her?" Simone looked at him, startled. After everything she did, he nodded. She's still human. That simple act of compassion, requesting aid for the very woman who tried to destroy him, would later be called the defining moment. Grace notes in real life. The press conference concluded with applause so sustained it felt like an ovation at a concert. Reporters, parents, children, even politicians spoke of him not just as a prodigy, but as a moral compass. Later that evening, at the Kennedy Center, Malik took the stage. The auditorium was packed beyond capacity, overflow crowds watching from screens outside. He sat at the grand piano. The lights dimmed, and for a moment he hesitated. Then he began to play a piece no one had ever heard before, composed quietly during the flight. He called it Grace Notes. The music rose and fell, weaving sorrow into hope, pain into beauty, dissonance into harmony. The audience wept openly, their applause thundering long after the final note faded. Malik stood, bowed once, and walked off stage without fanfare. He didn't need it. The music had spoken for him. By midnight, the incident had become the #1 story across the globe. Teachers used it as a lesson, activists as a rallying cry, families as a conversation starter, and through it all, Malik's words echoed. Excellence is the best answer to prejudice. Victoria Hale, meanwhile, vanished into the shadows of public disgrace, fired from her job, evicted from her apartment, her name forever tied to a cautionary tale. Yet even in her fall, Malik's offer lingered a chance to change. Should she choose it, history would remember that flight not for turbulence, not for its route, not even for its destination. It would remember it as the night a 12-year-old boy transformed cruelty into compassion, hatred into harmony, and injustice into a call for change. At 30,000 feet, a storm had raged, but on the ground, truth had landed. What began as an act of cruelty ended as a lesson for the world. A boy accused, humiliated, and treated like a threat became the very symbol of dignity and brilliance under pressure. Malik Carter didn't just defend his place in first class. He redefined what it means to belong anywhere. Victoria Hale's downfall was swift, public, and irreversible. But her disgrace was not the true ending. The real legacy of this flight lies in Malik's choice, not revenge, but grace. His message was simple, yet unforgettable. Excellence is the best response to prejudice. This story should stay with us long after the plane touched down. It reminds us that silence enables injustice, that courage can come from the youngest voices, and that redemption is possible only if we are willing to confront our own prejudices. So as you step away from this story tonight, ask yourself, when the moment comes, will you be the bystander or the ally if this story moved you? Share it so others can reflect too. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because more stories of truth, justice, and resilience are coming your way. Together, let's make sure voices like Malik's are never silenced.